Right now, 36,000 kilometers above your head, China is planning to do something that sounds absolutely impossible. Build a power plant the size of several football fields that beams electricity down to Earth using invisible microwave beams. If it works, it could power 1.5 million homes continuously, without burning a single drop of oil, without splitting a single atom, and without ever turning off. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. While most countries are still debating whether this is even possible, China has already spent over $10 billion and set a launch date. The countdown has begun. 400 kilometers above Earth, floating in what scientists call low Earth orbit, sits the Tiangong space station, China's orbital laboratory and humanity's newest home in space. Astronauts have conducted experiments there, taught lessons broadcast to millions of students below, and performed delicate spacewalks against the backdrop of our blue planet. But according to recent revelations from Beijing, Tiangong isn't just a research facility. It's a testing ground for something far more ambitious. In 2025, Chinese officials unveiled what many are calling the most audacious energy project of the 21st century. A space-based solar power station capable of generating 2 gigawatts of electricity from geostationary orbit. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to a large nuclear reactor on Earth. Except this one would orbit permanently above the equator, collecting sunlight 24 hours a day, never affected by clouds, darkness, or weather. The announcement sent shockwaves through the global scientific community. Some called it visionary. Others called it reckless. But almost no one called it impossible anymore. Because unlike past proposals that remained trapped in academic papers, China has already built the rockets, tested the technology, and drawn up a timeline that extends through 2035. So why would any nation attempt something this technically complex and staggeringly expensive? And perhaps more importantly, can it actually work? To understand why China is pursuing power generation in space, we need to first understand a problem that has haunted human civilization for over a century. How do we generate enough energy to power modern society without destroying the planet in the process? The story begins in 1879 when Thomas Edison managed to keep a single light bulb burning for more than 40 consecutive hours. That moment marked a turning point in human history. For the first time, people realized that electricity wasn't just a laboratory curiosity. It could be harnessed, controlled, and used continuously. But almost immediately, engineers faced a new challenge. How do we make enough of it? The answer they found was brutally simple. Burn coal. Factories began using coal to heat water, creating steam that drove massive turbines, which spun generators that produced electricity. This system powered the Industrial Revolution, lit up cities, and created the modern world we know today. But it came at a devastating cost. The air turned black with soot, rivers became polluted, and resources that took millions of years to form began disappearing at an alarming rate. By the 20th century, humanity started searching for alternatives. Hydroelectric dams became the first major breakthrough, using the natural flow of rivers to spin turbines and generate clean power. For decades, hydroelectricity was considered the ideal solution. It was renewable, efficient, and relatively safe. But there was a catch. Not every country has mighty rivers or suitable terrain for massive dams. Geography became destiny. Then came nuclear energy, which seemed to promise unlimited power from tiny amounts of fuel. By the mid-20th century, nuclear plants were being constructed worldwide, each one capable of powering entire cities from a single compact reactor. But nuclear power brought its own terrifying risks. Accidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima showed the world that when nuclear systems fail, they can render entire regions uninhabitable for generations. More recently, wind turbines and solar panels have emerged as the darlings of renewable energy. But they share a fundamental problem: inconsistency. Solar panels don't work at night. Wind turbines don't spin when the air is still. And both typically require enormous amounts of land in remote locations. far from the cities that actually need the power. So the question remained, is there an energy source that's clean, powerful, constant, and not limited by geography or weather? When scientists looked up at the sky, they found their answer. The concept of generating electricity in outer space was first proposed in 1968 by American aerospace engineer Peter Glaser. His idea was radical, yet elegant: place massive solar panels in orbit where the sun shines continuously, convert that energy into microwaves, and beam it down to receivers on Earth. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it was prohibitively expensive and technically impossible with 1960s technology. So for decades, space-based solar power remained confined to science fiction novels and theoretical research papers. But in 2008, something changed. China's State Administration of Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense formally announced they were studying the feasibility of space solar power stations. It wasn't just a research proposal, it was a declaration of intent. From that moment forward, China began pouring resources into what most nations considered a distant dream. Fast forward to 2025, and China has transformed that dream into a concrete plan with 3 distinct phases, specific technological milestones, and a budget exceeding $10 billion. The ultimate goal? A 2-gigawatt orbital power station operating in geostationary orbit, high enough to remain fixed above a single point on Earth, constantly bathed in unfiltered sunlight. To understand just how significant 2 gigawatts is, that's enough electricity to power approximately 1.5 million average households for an entire year. It's the output of a major nuclear facility, except without the radioactive waste, meltdown risks, or fuel limitations. So how exactly do you construct a power plant in space? The foundation was laid in April 2021 when China launched the Tianhe core module, the first building block of the Tiangong space station. When astronauts completed the orbital assembly and subsequent missions, they weren't just building a laboratory. They were testing every technology that would eventually be needed for space-based energy infrastructure. Tiangong was designed with specialized docking ports for high-voltage power system experiments. Its sophisticated robotic arm can manipulate and assemble large structural components in the vacuum of space, exactly the kind of capability needed to piece together a massive solar array in orbit. According to the official timeline, China will launch its first major test in 2028, a 10-kilowatt wireless power transmission demonstration satellite. This isn't meant to generate meaningful electricity for Earth. Instead, it's designed to prove a critical concept, that electrical energy can be converted into microwave beams or laser transmissions in space and successfully sent back to ground-based receivers. If that test succeeds, the project escalates rapidly. By 2030, China plans to deploy a 1-megawatt space solar station in geostationary orbit. That's still relatively small, but it would be the first permanent power-generating structure operating in deep space. Then, by 2035, they intend to scale it up to 10 megawatts, a 100-fold increase that would begin approaching commercially viable power generation. But all of this hinges on solving one enormous logistical problem. How do you get all those components into space in the first place? The rocket equation. Traditionally, launching anything into space required massive expendable rockets that burn up or crash into the ocean after a single use. For a structure the size of a space power station, potentially spanning several square kilometers, you'd need hundreds of individual launches. At current prices, that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars, making the entire project economically impossible. This is where China's Long March 9 rocket enters the picture. Unveiled publicly at the 2024 China International Aviation and Aerospace Exhibition, the Long March 9 represents a quantum leap in heavy lift capability. It can carry up to 140 metric tons to low Earth orbit in a single launch, more than enough to transport major structural components of a space power station. But raw lifting capacity isn't the real breakthrough. The Long March 9 is designed to be fully reusable. The first stage is scheduled to make its debut around 2030, with two-stage reusability expected between 2033 and 2035. This means the same rocket can make dozens or even hundreds of flights, slashing the per-kilogram cost of sending hardware to orbit. Think of it this way. Building a house becomes affordable because construction companies reuse their cranes and trucks. They don't build a new crane for every house. The Long March 9 applies that same logic to space infrastructure. At this point, you might be wondering, even if China can build this technically, why bother? Why not just cover a desert with solar panels on Earth? The answer lies in fundamental physics. In space, there is no night. There are no clouds, no storms, no atmospheric interference, no seasonal variations. A solar panel in geostationary orbit receives sunlight 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, with an intensity far greater than anything possible on Earth's surface. By the time sunlight reaches ground level, it has already been absorbed and scattered by our atmosphere. In orbit, those losses simply don't exist. This means a space-based solar panel can generate electricity continuously and at much higher efficiency per square meter than any Earth-based installation. No battery storage needed, no backup generators, just constant, reliable power. Furthermore, building massive solar farms on Earth creates real problems: ecological disruption, land use conflicts, population displacement, and visual pollution. A space power station requires almost no land, just a compact receiving antenna on the ground. Of course, generating power in space is only half the battle. The other half is getting that energy back to Earth safely and efficiently. This is where microwave beam technology comes in. As early as 2022, Chinese researchers working on the Chasing the Sun project achieved a major breakthrough. They successfully transmitted energy via microwave beam over a ground distance of 55 meters with an efficiency of 87.3%. Now, 55 meters might not sound impressive, but the goal of that test wasn't distance. It was precision and stability. The researchers needed to prove that a microwave beam could be controlled with extreme accuracy and that the transmitting and receiving systems could coordinate flawlessly. By 2025, the project entered its second phase, testing wireless power transmission in actual orbital conditions. The challenge now isn't whether it can be done, but whether it can be done reliably over distances of thousands of kilometers, with satellites moving at tremendous speeds, all while maintaining beam coherence and safety. As China's space energy program has advanced, Western governments have begun raising concerns, publicly framing them around environmental protection and the integrity of outer space. But the real worry is strategic. Geostationary orbit is a finite resource. There are only so many stable positions where a satellite can remain fixed above a single point on Earth. If China establishes space power stations first, it could claim prime orbital slots, set global technical standards, and build an integrated supply chain that other nations would struggle to compete with. More fundamentally, whoever controls space-based energy infrastructure could reshape global power dynamics, literally and figuratively. If the world's energy supply eventually shifts away from oil and coal toward orbital solar power, then traditional energy-based leverage dissolves. Countries that once controlled fossil fuel supplies would lose influence, while nations that control space energy transmission could gain pricing power over future markets. Interestingly, despite public criticisms, Western nations haven't moved towards serious blockades or sanctions. Why? Because they also want this technology. The United States explored space-based solar power heavily in the early 2000s with backing from the White House and Congress, but the project stalled due to high costs and technical risks. In 2023, researchers at the California Institute of Technology successfully demonstrated microwave beam steering technology in orbit, a critical proof of concept, but overall progress remains years behind China's timeline. Europe is also trying to catch up. The European Space Agency has indicated it will make a final decision by the end of 2025 on whether to commit fully to development based on technology readiness, budget constraints, and political will among member states. Current European research focuses primarily on assembling gigawatt-scale structures in orbit, a prerequisite for any serious power generation. What separates China's program from Western attempts isn't just funding, it's continuity. Space-based solar power requires sustained investment over 10, 20, even 30 years. It demands coordinated efforts across multiple industries: aerospace, materials science, energy transmission, robotics, and more. This kind of long-term strategic planning has proven difficult for democracies with changing administrations and shifting political priorities. China, by contrast, has maintained focus since 2008. Rather than getting stuck at the level of academic papers and prototype demonstrations, Chinese institutions have systematically validated each critical technology in parallel: wireless energy transmission, orbital assembly, deployment of ultra-large structures, and high-efficiency solar conversion. Each milestone has clear objectives and measurable outcomes. So where does all of this leave us? As of early 2026, we stand at a fascinating inflection point. China's 2028 demonstration satellite is just 2 years away. If successful, it will prove that space-based power transmission isn't science fiction, it's engineering reality. The 2031 megawatt station will mark the beginning of commercial-scale operations. And by 2035, if everything proceeds according to plan, a 10-megawatt orbital power plant will be beaming clean, continuous electricity down to Earth. Will it work? The physics says yes. The engineering challenges are enormous, but not insurmountable. The economics remain uncertain, but rapidly improving rocket reusability is changing the calculus. What we're witnessing isn't just an energy project. It's the beginning of humanity's transition from a planet-bound civilization to one that harnesses resources from space itself. And whether you see China's ambitions as inspiring or concerning, one thing is undeniable. The race to build the first space power station is already underway. Perhaps one day soon, the electricity powering your home, charging your devices, and lighting your streets will come not from a coal plant, not from a nuclear reactor, but from a silent structure orbiting silently above the equator, collecting sunlight that never ends, generating power that never stops. The future of energy might not be beneath our feet, it might be above our heads.